China has a lot of resources to throw at this if they decide to do it at scale. And I think we see some elements of that certainly relating to Hong Kong right now. And I think that that will grow quickly in the next few years. Absolutely. I think in the past, or in the more recent past, I think especially looking at their social media presence, there's been more of an effort toward positively influencing opinions on China. A lot of, we're okay, you should like us, it's all really great here, and less of what we see from sort of private sector, some of the private sector actors or actors like Russia that are much more sort of divisive, psychologically targeted operations within specific countries. But I think that that's changing, and they seem to be, China seems to be a little more focused on developing their own capabilities, particularly in their own neighborhood. And I suspect that that will be something they use abroad as well. It's interesting because like China is so, they're so much more deliberate in how they do things. So it's always slower, right? There's sort of a, let's see what works, let's see what works, let's see what works. There's much less risk-taking than the Russians do. But I think it'll be interesting to see how this develops. I think Hong Kong is going to be a really interesting environment for them to test a lot of things, especially in the information realm. And I think a lot of that will then be used here, especially for the elections, but I think just in general. Well, I mean, Taiwan is a very specific focus for China always, right? And I think they see that they have more opportunity to influence the internal mindset about China, about China's presence in the neighborhood, about Taiwan, about its future. And they do seem to be leaning more into narratives about why China is a better choice for Taiwan than other options. I think that that seems still more focused in these lanes of you should pick us, but I don't think it'll stay that way. I think there will probably be more what we sort of term black PR campaigns going forward. But it's sort of a new. There's been some really good research done here documenting some of these campaigns. And I think social media has been partially helpful. The social media platforms have been partially helpful in documenting or helping to document some of the data that supports the analysis of that. But you know, China has a lot of resources to throw at this if they decide to do it at scale. And I think we see some elements of that certainly relating to Hong Kong right now. And I think that that will grow quickly in the next few years. You know, China has, in terms of its influence in Taiwan, in the neighborhood and beyond, has a broad package of influence tools that they use. So some of it is economic. There's all of these institutes that they fund around the world that are supposed to open minds toward China and what it presents to everyone. So sort of cultural influence, economic influence. There's a lot of places where they just throw a lot of money at things to gain access to the right people. There's certainly some political and diplomatic influence places, but their forays into more global media, not quite yet replicating something like RT, like the Russian state media apparatus, but leaning more in that direction, are significant. There's a lot of not directly labeled outlets that I think they put money behind. They, like Russia and others, spend a lot of time cultivating experts that sort of lean into their narratives and present them in their own countries. So there's a lot of that, which is all sort of in the more traditional influence space. But I think that's now being supplemented by more in the online information realm. Influence campaigns on social media that are not directly overt, that are not labeled, China wants you to believe this, that are using the same types of tactics and tools that we've seen from Russian information operations and others in the past 5 years, but networks of false identity accounts that are promoting narratives, pretending to be participants in a given environment or community showing support for ideas or candidates or values within an environment where it's totally fake. And I think that will be, for them, a key way of trying to influence opinion is sort of building these networks to influence public opinion. I think everywhere is susceptible to this type of influence, and we all want to believe that we're better than others and we'll see it when it comes our way, but that isn't actually true. I think Taiwan is a very specific environment. China obviously has long-term psychological understanding of the political, cultural, media landscape here, and that gives them a lot of capability to intervene with different narratives. But I do think Taiwan is a very online society. I think Line is the primary social media platform here, but people communicate with their networks of friends using social media. They consume political information from social media. And the more online political discourse becomes, the easier it is to use simple narratives to disrupt the way people think, the way they're making decisions, the way they evaluate information. In ways that are very hard to combat. And we've seen this in a lot of other places. There's been more research done, I think, about the Kremlin's information campaigns than others. But the bottom line of all of it is essentially, once you see information and you think that it's true, basically the first thing you see is the thing you always reference back to. So it doesn't matter if it was fake or not true or false or completely a lie. And it's later debunked and someone shows that to you, you believe the false information that you were first shown. And this is just a really hard cognitive landscape to deal with when we're talking about disinformation. Exactly. It still influences the way that you see the next piece of information. And that has proven to be a really difficult issue in terms of combating disinformation. There are differences in influence campaigns, right? You know, political parties, governments try to do the same things internally, sort of promote information in different ways. But when we're talking about a hostile foreign actor using manipulative and coercive means to influence the landscape of decision-making within a target nation, and that is the key about when we're talking about information warfare. It's not just throwing fake stories out into a landscape to put out bad information, it's about behavioral change. You're trying to change the behavior of a target audience. And whether that be getting them to vote, not to vote, think a different way, do something else, that is the goal of information warfare. And I think when that is the goal of a hostile foreign actor trying to influence an environment so that a domestic population makes decisions in a different way that is somehow more favorable to it, even if it is just creating a more chaotic political landscape, then this is something where we need to have more regulation, more rules, more transparency in particular from social media platforms about the scale of these campaigns so we can figure out better what to do about them. And some of it is, for all of us, for any country, a domestic problem, right? You need these cognitive defenses that we're not used to cultivating in the more recent history, certainly in the West, that I think some countries have better reflexes on. The Baltic states are a good example, where they know their history, they know their values, they know what they fought for, they know what they stand for, and they know the narrative of disinformation that is often put in front of them by their most prominent adversary, which is Russia. I think Taiwan is starting to look at things the same way, the government here, like how do we present the narrative of Chinese disinformation to our public without making it a political issue, but just sort of showing that this is what is targeting our country. And I think that's really important. It's difficult to do, but developing institutions within government structures that are seen as independent, that are not talking about a specific actor or person or a network of accounts, but who are really looking at the narrative line of disinformation targeting a public, it's a very helpful thing to have. Yeah, the research that's been done about the Line app as a social media platform that's been really effective, and the way that basically it's sort of the same way as Facebook and Twitter have, everybody has design built in to keep people engaged in the platform, But the way that line has been used to keep people engaged in these disinformation campaigns through little rewards and sort of engagement tactics of the platform, but again, exploiting the structure of the platform in a really specific way to amplify the effects of disinformation across specific networks here, I think is a really interesting example of where we need platforms and applications more engaged in these discussions. Absolutely. With these different groups that are not public, it's not just a public Twitter thread that people can sort of dig into and see who's contributing, but it's a closed group or an invited group that's promoting specific information. Anytime it's the same thing as the big networks of fake accounts on Facebook or Twitter that were used in the 2016 elections in the United States that often still exist. But where it's networks of fake accounts, so it's I'm a Marine wife and I support gun rights and Jesus and Eagle flag, MAGA MAGA, but when it's an account that looks like you, it short circuits your defense mechanisms to evaluate information that's put in front of you. And I think these closed groups are the same way, where it's like another line of defenses that the information is already through when it's put in front of you, so it makes it more believable somehow. It's also incredibly difficult to track. The purpose of a lot of these applications is encryption, some level of anonymity. You can't really pull the data down. Well, in theory, you're not supposed to have the data available for research. And that makes it hard to see even what the scale of these campaigns is, how far they go, who they have targeted, how they have targeted people. It makes it very difficult to do any analysis of how to stop them.